$967. That's your SSI check, the one you planned around, the one that covers the insulin, the electric bill, and the copay you've been pushing to next month for 3 months straight. You planned around it the way you plan around everything when the margin is zero. Then a letter arrives. Not an email, a letter. Official, government seal. And somewhere in the third paragraph, buried under language designed to be read by attorneys, is a sentence that changes the arithmetic of your entire month, maybe your entire year. You have been overpaid. That is all it says, really. Everything else is bureaucratic scaffolding around those 4 words. And those 4 words mean something very specific now in 2026 that they did not mean 18 months ago. This is what changed. This is what you need to know before it happens to you. Because the people it's happening to right now did not know. And not knowing cost some of them everything. The Social Security Administration manages payments for roughly 73 million Americans. Retirement benefits, disability benefits, SSI for low-income seniors and people who cannot work. The checks go out. The math is supposed to be right. Most of the time, it is. But the system is not perfect. It was never perfect. What changed was not the imperfection. What changed was what happens when they find one. For most of Social Security's history, when the SSA determined that a beneficiary had received more than they were owed, even if it was the agency's own calculation error, even if it happened years ago,
Even if the recipient had no idea, the agency's default response was to take it back. All of it. At once. Your next check? 0. Sometimes the check after that? Also 0. Until the balance was recovered, the money stopped. People lost their apartments. People skipped medications. People called family members they hadn't spoken to in years and asked for money they didn't want to ask for. A 2024 report documented cases of beneficiaries driven into homelessness by overpayment clawbacks on amounts they never knew they'd received. There was outcry, congressional hearings, investigative reporting. The word cruelty was used at a Senate committee hearing by the Social Security Commissioner himself to describe the practice of intercepting 100% of a benefit check. In March of 2025, the policy changed. The SSA capped clawback withholding at 10% of your monthly benefit. You still had to pay it back, but you kept 90 cents of every dollar while you did. For millions of fixed-income seniors and disabled Americans, that difference was the difference between stability and crisis. That policy lasted about a year. On March 7th, 2026, the new administration announced it was reversing the 10% cap. Effective March 27th, 2026, the default withholding rate for new Social Security overpayments, retirement, survivors, disability, SSDI, would return to 100%. Full check, gone, until the debt is cleared. The SSA framed it as fiscal responsibility. The Office of the Chief Actuary estimated it would recover approximately $7 billion over the next decade. The acting commissioner cited the obligation to protect trust funds. The language was clean, managerial, institutional. What it meant in practice was that a 71-year-old woman on a fixed income who received an overpayment notice in late March could open her mailbox in April and find a check for $0. The backlash was immediate. AARP called it a step in the wrong direction. Advocacy groups pointed out that a significant portion of SSA overpayments are the agency's own fault. Delayed processing, data errors, manual calculation mistakes on complex benefits. The people getting $0 checks were, in many cases, people who had followed every rule and still ended up on the wrong end of an administrative error they had no way to detect. Then came a second revision. On April 25th, 2026, 6 days before May 1st, the SSA released a formal policy update. The 100% default clawback was walked back again. The new standard? 50%. For overpayment notices sent on or after April 25th, the withholding rate for Title II benefits, retirement, survivor, family, and SSDI is now 50% of your monthly check. Not 100, not 10, 50. What this means in plain terms, if you receive an overpayment notice dated after April 25th, the SSA will begin deducting half of your monthly benefit until the balance is recovered. If your check is $1,400 a month, you will receive $700 while we're paying. If your check is $2,000, you will receive $1,000. For people whose entire budget is built on that check, half is not nothing. Half is still a crisis for a lot of households, but it is not zero, and that distinction matters. Now the part that is most important, the part that is most likely to be misunderstood. The SSI rules did not change. Supplemental Security Income Overpayment withholding remains capped at 10%. If you receive SSI, not SSDI, not retirement, SSI specifically, your maximum withholding rate for an overpayment is still 10% of your monthly benefit. That has not changed through any of these reversals. If you receive both SSI and Social Security, the rules apply differently to each portion. The Social Security portion is subject to the 50% cap. The SSI portion remains at 10%. These are separate calculations. Write that down, read it again, because the difference between SSI and SSDI is the difference that determines how much of your income you keep.
There is something else in this change that most people are not talking about. Your overpayment notices now carry a different notice requirement. The SSA is required to provide clearer, more detailed documentation explaining why the overpayment occurred, how much is owed, and what your options are. This is not optional language on their end. It is a procedural obligation built into the April 25th policy update. You have rights in this process, 3 of them that matter most. The first is the right to appeal. If you believe you were not overpaid, or if you believe the amount is wrong, you have 90 days from the date of the notice to contest it formally. While the appeal is pending, the SSA is not supposed to withhold your payment. The repayment clock does not start until the appeal is resolved. The second is the right to request a waiver, Form SSA 632. If the overpayment was not your fault and repaying it would create financial hardship, you can ask the SSA to forgive it entirely or reduce the amount. Both conditions generally need to be demonstrated, that you are not responsible for the error and that repayment would genuinely compromise your ability to meet basic needs. The waiver is not guaranteed, but it is a real option that is approved regularly. The third is the right to negotiate the rate. Even within the new 50% framework, you can contact the SSA and request a lower withholding rate if the 50% deduction would prevent you from covering essential expenses: housing, food, medication. Call or visit your local office. Make the request. Get it documented. None of these rights are automatic. You have to invoke them. You have to know they exist to invoke them. That is the part of this story that doesn't appear in the official press releases. The majority of Social Security overpayments are not the recipient's fault. A July 2025 Inspector General report found that improper payments represent less than 1% of total benefit outlays. But within that fraction, a disproportionate share of errors occur in SSDI and SSI, programs where eligibility fluctuates month to month based on income, work activity, living arrangements, and medical status. The system is designed in a way that makes errors structurally likely. The SSA receives updated wage data from employers and the IRS, sometimes months after the fact. By the time the discrepancy is flagged, the overpayment has compounded. You can follow every rule. Report your income, report your living situation, report the part-time work you picked up for 3 months and then stopped, and still receive an overpayment notice 2 years later because the agency's processing timeline didn't keep pace with the information it already had. This is not a hypothetical. This is documented. It is common enough that it has a pattern, a name in advocacy circles, and a decade of reporting behind it. What this means for you practically: do not assume a notice is wrong, but do not assume it is right either. The first call you make when that letter arrives should not be to panic. It should be to verify. Call the SSA. Ask for the specific documentation of how the overpayment was calculated. Request it in writing if you can. And if the number doesn't match your records, you have 90 days to say so formally. There is a separate change happening simultaneously that is less visible but affects more people day to day. The SSA's field office structure has been contracting. Walk-in service at local Social Security offices has been largely eliminated, replaced by an appointment-only system. For seniors without reliable transportation or phone access, for people who need an interpreter, for anyone whose situation requires real-time human judgment rather than an automated phone queue, this shift has created a practical barrier to accessing rights they legally possess. The April appointment rule includes exceptions. Members of vulnerable populations, people with terminal illnesses, military personnel, and situations requiring urgent or specialized attention can still receive walk-in service.
But the exceptions require you to know they apply to you. They require you to say so at the door. They require a level of self-advocacy that is harder to execute when you are elderly, disabled, or in crisis over a $0 check. Staffing at the agency is under pressure from multiple directions simultaneously. The infrastructure through which you exercise your appeal rights is the same infrastructure that is being reduced. That tension is real, and it is not abstract. Here is what the May 1st window means and why you are hearing about it now. April 25th was the effective date of the new 50% withholding cap. Overpayment notices mailed from that date forward carry the new standard. Any notice you receive dated before April 25th, 2026 is subject to the older rules, and depending on when it was issued, may still carry the 10% rate from the 2024 reform. If you receive a notice now, check the date. That date determines which rule applies to your case. If you have already been repaying an overpayment that was assessed before March 27, 2025, your rate does not change. You continue under whatever arrangement is currently in place. No action required unless you want to renegotiate the terms. If the overpayment was assessed after March 27th, but before April 25th, the 100% default may apply, unless you have already filed an appeal or waiver that is pending, in which case collection is on hold while that process runs. If your notice is dated April 25th or later, the 50% cap applies. This is a narrow and important set of distinctions. The date on the envelope is not bureaucratic detail. It is the operative fact. The number that matters most in all of this is not a dollar figure. It is the SSA's national line. It is the number you call when the letter arrives and you don't understand what it says. It is the number you call when you want to request a lower withholding rate. It is the number you call before you assume there is nothing you can do, because there almost always is something you can do. And most people who lose the fight lost it because they didn't know the fight was available to them.
The system is not designed to make these options obvious. The notices are long and written in a register that is not plain English. The appeal timelines are real, but not prominently featured. The waiver exists, but the form number is not included in every notice. You have to know where to look, or you have to know someone who knows. There is a 67-year-old woman somewhere right now who has been receiving SSDI for 11 years. She has never worked above the income threshold. She reports faithfully, she checks her mail, she is not behind on anything. She has never received an overpayment notice. She will receive one this year, or she won't. Most people won't. Overpayments affect less than 1% of total benefit payments. Statistically, the odds favor you. But the 1% is not a rounding error when you are the 1%. When it is your check that does not arrive, the odds don't mean anything. What means something is whether you knew, whether someone told you before the letter came what to do when it does. Now you know. The letter might never come. You may spend the next 20 years receiving your correct amount on the correct date and never have a reason to dial that number. That is the most likely outcome. But if it does come, if you open your mailbox on a Tuesday and find 4 words sitting in the 3rd paragraph of an official government letter, you will know it is not final. You will know it is the beginning of a process, not the end of one. You will know there is a waiver form and an appeal window and a phone number and a right to negotiate. You will know what the people who lost their apartments in 2022 did not know. The check is not gone. Not yet. Not if you move.